everyone, Professor K here, and we're going to look at the differences between for and while loops today, using our Animal Crossing example. So what are the differences between for and while loops? Well, when you're getting started with JavaScript, you're probably mostly going to be writing for loops. In fact, I don't use anything but for loops that often. The real difference between for and while loops, in my opinion, is that with for loops, you have some idea of the number of times you're going to be doing or executing the statement. So for example, with our Animal Crossing example, I know that my list of animals is only 3 animals long. But with a while loop, you might want to use that when you don't know how many iterations that you might be dealing with. And this would be more likely to come up in, say, a video game, right? If you were writing some code to prevent somebody from walking through walls, you might create a while loop to say, well, character position is not in front of a wall. And there's going to be some parentheses around that to say, well, this statement is true. Go ahead and keep walking. So that would be where a while loop might be useful. But in beginning JavaScript, you're probably not going to be dealing with this too much. That's more likely to come up in more complex programming. But just so that you know the difference for down the line, let's take a look and see what those look like. All right, so here we have our Animal Crossing names, and you remember that our original goal was to log out the name of each Animal Crossing character. So we stored our animals in a constant because those animals aren't going to change. We're not going to modify them. And then down here in our for loop, we set an iteration variable, I, right? And we said we're going to start at 0. We're going to check that the number of iterations is less than the length of animals. And we can actually, I'll show you what happens, why we always use less than here instead of less than or equal to. I'll show you why that matters in a minute. And then at the end of every iteration, mark that down once. All right, so first of all, let's start with why do we care so much that our iterations are 1 less than the total number of animals and not equal? So here, I'm going to clear out the log and just show you what would happen if we did less than or equal to. So here, let's run this and watch the console. Okay, so we've got Isabel at position 0, Brewster at position 1, and Pascal at position 2. But here, at position 3, animals at 3 is undefined. And the reason why that is because the first position in an array is always position 0. So if we were to do less than or equal to, we would actually be trying to output 4 items when there are only 3. So that's why it's really important to always really think about what your condition is and exactly what you want to do. Generally speaking, you just want to do a less than here. So let's clear this out, run it one more time, and we should be back in business. Yep, perfect. Isabel, Brewster, Pascal. All right, so now we're going to set a new goal. Find out what the difference between for and while is. So you can actually use for and while loops in very similar ways. I could write this exact same loop in a while loop. The syntax is just a little bit different. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So here, let's clear this out, and I'm just going to add something to my console.log, a string that will help me remember this is from the for loop result. So for loop result, animals.name. And let's see what that looks like before we get into writing that while loop. So let's run this. Cool, so now we can see what's coming from the for loop. Now I'm gonna do the same type of logic, but I wanna do it using a while loop so that I can demonstrate to you what the difference is. So let's clear out our console, and now I am going to write a while loop. So the syntax for this is while, and then you are going to have two parentheses, and that's where your condition statement is going to be. So up here in the for loop, this was our condition statement. What is the condition where we want this to run? Here in while, we're going to put that just right in between the parentheses. And then we have our block using the curly brackets, and then this is going to be instructions for what to do in the loop. So here we want to say, well, our iterations are less than animals.length, do something. But if we were to try and do this right now, we would have a problem. So let's console.log. Let's even try and do our exact same stuff here. So while loop result, animals.name. So let's try running this and see if this works, because I think we might have a problem. Yep, here we go. I is not defined. So remember how I said that variables in ES6 are really neat because you aren't allowed to redeclare, say, a let variable, that type of variable in the same scope. Scope is basically whenever you have these two little curly brackets, you're in a new scope. So inside this for loop, this let I equals 0 only exists in that for loop, which is why when we try and use I over here, we're getting this reference error. If you're getting a reference error and you're like, but I defined I, you're probably in the wrong scope. You probably need to redefine it or think about where your variable is defined. So here, I'm going to put a let I equals 0. And we're going to try running this one more time and say, okay, maybe now it'll work. So let's run this and see what happens. It's going to take a minute. Huh? Oh, check this out. It doesn't even, it doesn't actually stop. So this is something that's going to happen with loops, especially while loops. Because the loop needs to check this condition. So this condition is while I is less than animals.length. Up here we said that I was 0. But then we never did anything with I. So as long as this is true, this is going to keep happening. That's the deal with a while loop. While condition is true, do the stuff inside. And what's happening here is I is 0. So, and I doesn't change. We haven't told I to change. We haven't said, mark that down in our increment, put another mark on our tally. So what's happening here is that forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, and that's why you saw a million of these while loop results show up. This keeps happening. And what that is called is just broken. I'll come up with the terminology for it in a minute. It's an infinite loop, right? Because it keeps happening infinitely. So this can cause real problems with your program. So here we need to explicitly say at the end of the loop, I plus plus. And now when we clear this out, oh geez, it keeps going. We need to save this and refresh here because it's just going to keep going. Usually the browser will throw an error at you, but it seems like CodePen is a little more, I don't know if forgiving is the right word because it really shouldn't forgive you on that, but it's not good. It's running an infinite loop. So now you can see, now that we've let's clear this out and run one more time. And remember, the change here is that we added this I++. And now we can see that this loop is properly working. Our for loop results, Isabel, Brewster, and Pascal. While loop results, Isabel, Brewster, and Pascal. So this is great. It does the same thing, but there's a lot more risk that you're going to forget to stop the infinite loop. So in general, when you're writing JavaScript, especially as a beginner, just stick with for loops. These while loops are really better, again, for game design. So let's see a valid use of a while loop. And I'm going to do this using pseudocode. So this isn't real code. This isn't going to do anything when you try to run it. But if you wanted an example of a valid while loop, a good time when you would want things to keep going, unless something is true, right? We might have walking code in a video game. And here we would say function walk. And then we might accept a direction, right? What direction are you going in? Up, down, left, right. And you might say while the next step does not equal a wall. So as long as you're not hitting a wall, go ahead and we're going to call this check walls, actually. Walk in the direction. Oops. There we go. That's a little better. So here, this would be a function that would check as you're walking that you're not hitting a wall, right? So while you're not hitting a wall, go ahead and walk in the direction. And the time that would keep this from being an infinite loop, that would stop this loop from running, would be if the next step was a wall. So if next step equaled a wall, then it would stop. So that's why you might use a while loop. When you want to keep walking forever and ever and ever until you hit a wall. That would be a valid use of a while loop. That said, in this class, you're really not going to be using the while loop much. So what's helpful to know about the while loop is that it exists. If you see it, it's really great for times where you want something to keep happening until you say, go ahead and stop. So there might be some valid uses of while loops, including in video games and walking, potentially with animation, but generally speaking, you're just going to be using for loops in this class. So this is really more about knowing what the difference is and kind of recognizing them out in the wild. In general, just try to use for loops. Stick with that. You're going to be just fine with those. So hopefully that helps you understand the difference, and I will see you later.